Okay.
It's on golf. I don't know what it's on.
Here comes Bernie.
Okay, live to probably everywhere right now. So
Got 3
there
minutes.
y'all are. Hello, folks that are watching. Hopefully we got a big crowd on the 3 or 4 platforms we're on. I'm Brian Manzella. Everybody else here has got their name next to them. You probably recognize most of them from the promos. If you're a golf instruction aficionado, junkie, I think all of the folks here are, this should be a really fun 2 hours. I've got a bunch of questions. I think golf teachers and golf professionals who are watching are going to get something out of this because we're going to talk a little bit about the business and different things like that. And regular golfers all over the world that are watching, whether it's live or taped, should get a lot out of it too, because you got about 430 something years or more of combined experience in the room. So I think that's saying a lot. Obviously, you know, Mount Rushmore and Hall of Fame people too. So first question. So the way this is going to work for the folks both in the show here and folks watching at home, I'm going to start each question to a particular golf professional here, and they're going to answer. And then if everybody else doesn't have anything to say, we go to the next question. But we hope that almost every time there's going to be something else to say. So here's the first question to David Leadbetter. Thanks so much for coming on, David.
Thanks,
so when I got in this crazy business, 82 was my first lesson. So we were coming out of the 70s, square to square, right? So very weak grips, upright swings. And then swings got flatter. You helped do that. Grips got a little bit stronger, right? And then we came into the new millennial. Grips kind of stayed strong. And then all of a sudden, 160 mile an hour ball speed wasn't good enough to be a tour player unless you could putt like Brian Gay or David Thompson. And people started hitting it real far, and the grips, maybe even for a second there, a couple of years ago, to me, just from my observation, got stronger. But this new wave of young players that have come out, and a bunch of them have won right away, seems like the grip is going a little bit weaker. What have you noticed about this evolution that I've talked about here, and where you think it's going?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And if you look through the history of instruction, or the history of the game, really, I mean, we see phases, don't we? We see periods of time where players probably copy somebody who's really playing well at the time, and they have models. You go back to probably Harry Varden, and you've got Bobby Jones, and you've obviously got the Hogan, Snead, and Byron Nelson era. Then you go forward to the Jack Nicklaus, Tom Watson era, and then you probably go to Faldo, Greg Norman, Nick Price era, and obviously through to Tiger, et cetera, et cetera. So it is interesting how, you know, players tend to copy what players are doing well. And so if we look today, I mean, we look at some of the wrist positions that we see in the golf swing. It's really interesting. I was doing a show the other day with Gary Player, you know, and Gary, he's adamant. He said, listen, he said, you know, if I'd known this wrist position, a la Hogan, he said, I would have won double the number of majors. You know, Gary tends to exaggerate just a little bit, but you know, but he was confident that the fact that, you know, the reason for his big hooks through the years was the fact that he got it this way and had to face more that way. And so I think if you look at it today, they're better athletes, let's face it. I think personally, when you look at it, and I think Gary's right to a certain extent. He said, look, if you look at Arnold Palmer, you look at Lee Trevino, they had fairly short careers, and it required a lot of strength in order to maintain that position through impact there. There was a lot of hip rotation. There was a lot of underneath movement with the right shoulder. And you're seeing obviously a lot of guys today who are very, very strong. And if you look, you know, you look at Koepka, you look at Dustin. I mean, there are a bunch of players, and there's a lot of young players. I'm thinking this young Morikawa, great iron player. There again, you look at the player, maybe somebody like a Jordan Spieth, who you would say maybe doesn't have the strength or the firepower to maybe handle that. You know, that's just an opinion. But it is interesting how you see the phases of golf instruction, and I think there's a lot of merit to it. I asked John Ram a year or so ago, where did he get this? He said, I've always had that. I always gripped it very, very weak, right up in the palm. My teacher wanted me to do that, and he looked at me, built like a bull. And you could say, well, listen, there's no reason why he couldn't play with that. I mean, obviously, he's a great player. I mean, it's a nice little left to right shape, and which most of those players tend to do. But then I remember looking at a few years ago at Graham McDowell. Now, McDowell had that, I mean, that was pretty much a product of him growing up in Northern Ireland, playing on those links golf courses, trying to keep the ball down. So I think we're a product of an environment. I think today, with all the notoriety about the game, all the stuff on social media, and I think you see young players and even teachers. I think it's dangerous to a point where everybody has to do that. I think we've got to look at, in my opinion, I think a lot of instruction is geared too much towards good players these days. I think the average player sometimes would certainly struggle from that position, and then you have to look at probably the best ball striker in the history of the game, for Ben Hogan, who actually went this way in order to sort of eliminate his, devastating hook that he had.
Anybody got anything to add there? Mike Perpich.
Yeah, the one comment I'd make is, the question is, what is the purpose of a grip? And sometimes players have a grip or change their grip to not do something. And what I always try to do is have a grip that is going to facilitate something. So that was interesting what David said about Spieth is, does his grip match what he's trying to do? And I'm always, if I'm going to, I want proper grips, whatever that would mean. But I think the grip has to accommodate what the player's trying to do and how you're trying to do it.
No doubt about it. Anybody else? Tom Rezendes? I got you, Kev. Next. Go ahead, Tom.
I think a lot of the eras that you talked about, that era where the grip started to get really strong is when I think a lot of lag and forward shafting was prevalent. So kind of video had come on the scene, and now people are starting to realize that you don't really want to have all this lag, and the grips are kind of going back to the way they were.
Needed to match up. Kevin Walker?
Add that through the different phases of grips, you've also had a lot of different changes in equipment. And the shafts have changed, the balls have changed, went from the Bellata and the Persimmon that was very spinny to a lower spin. And now I think we have the ability to dial in shaft profiles and weights and torques and everything much better to match up to the individual player. So I think that you're going to see a little bit more individuality, I think, rather than everybody leaning in one direction or the other.
Cool. Okay. Next question. Mr. McLean, Jim McLean right here. Thanks for a couple of years here if I get the right guy. Or do you think maybe it waters down our industry because obviously the lack of experience at a high level? What do you think about that? There's a lot of it now. There used to not be any.
Well, there's a lot of information out there right now, and some people are tremendous reciters. There are people that have memorized the Bible. So you can have a lot of information at a very young age. And if you can get tour players to listen to you, you must be pretty good. Because the PGA and LPGA tours players really know what they're doing. It's tough to BS them very long, that's for sure. I think you can get better a lot faster as a teacher right now. I think that young teachers tend to think they know a lot more than they do later on in their life after you've had a lot of experience teaching. You've been out there teaching all types of players, and you even tour players. So you find out that, there's more than a few ways to do this, and there's some people that are just super gifted. And the other problem could be you can do damage. Golf's one game where you can stay the same, you can get better, but you can also get worse. So I would just say, I think there's a lot of really talented young teachers out there that are well trained, but when you're stepping into the major leagues, you got to be careful that you're not taking, really doing some damage to a top player who has a different way of doing it.
Great answer. Go ahead, Martin. Chuck, I'll come to you, Bill.
Hey, everybody. Jim, great point. I think that despite the coach, a great player is going to figure out how to be a great player in a lot of ways. I think a quality coach, there was a great post Butch Harmon posted a couple of weeks ago on his Instagram. He showed 7 of his players over time. Each one of them I could teach off the tour in 2 minutes if I tried to fix some flaw that if they came to me struggling with, that if I wasn't experienced enough to look at it and go, okay, what could I softly do to inspire some confidence rather than some wholesale swing change? And I think experience comes with that. Whereas maybe somebody that gets a ton of great information nowadays from coaches like you guys that are so good at putting information out there, that they might be more likely to jump in with a fix when it may not be something that it might just need a small massage to get the player's confidence back. And I think that's where, some of the elite coaches on this program right now are great at, rather than making a massive change, a mild touch up and the player's ready to go. I think that takes experience.
Great. Bill Harmon.
Well, I was hoping we could go these 2 hours and nobody mentioned Butch's name, but I already lost that early. I think
Over and under was 9 minutes, so.
I think too much importance is placed on teaching the tour player. What percentage of people that play golf are tour players? Maybe less than 0.1%. And what percentage of teachers actually teach tour players? 1 or 2%. And so we have 99.9% of all golfers are amateurs. And I think that we've lost a certain value of the beauty of taking an 18 handicap to a 12 or 12 to a 7. 99% of my time I spend teaching amateurs. And so I think it's noteworthy to teach tour players, but as Jimmy and David know and Butch know, at some level you get a lot of credit, and then all of a sudden one of them plays bad and then everybody's all over you, that you ruined this guy's career. But I think the real teachers are the people that are out on the range every day teaching their members or guests and the amateur. And I think that over the years, as teachers became more publicized and stuff, which is great, and I get all that, and maybe I'm skewed because I was born a Harmon and I already kind of was born into that. I get tremendous satisfaction out of taking a 28 to an 18, and I think that's being lost, the art of teaching the amateur golfer. You try teaching Mrs. Haberkamp's John Rahm swing and see how that works, And so I think the real art of teaching is to teach the recreational golfer and see if you can get them to play well enough to enjoy it. It's not as sexy as teaching the tour player, but it's very rewarding.
No doubt. Anybody else? Yeah, Nick Clearwater down there with the puppy dog.
Yeah. So I think there seem to be 3 good avenues that you can make to be a noteworthy teacher. The first one is actually be really good at your job. Second one is to just be the loudest voice on the internet. That seems to be helping quite a few people as well. And then that third one is have an Instagram presence, because the PGA Tour players are very naive, I think, to golf instruction. That's super convenient for them as well to just find on social media someone, and they actually pick their coach that way. It's a little sad in many ways, but that's sort of the world we live in, and it's convenient for a tour player. So I see the same thing you do. Coaches who haven't taught for very long, 5 seconds sometimes. I've walked out on the PGA Tour range and probably saw Bill Harmon standing there, but saw another coach helping a tour player and almost fell over because I don't even think he taught a lesson before he walked up to that player. So it's becoming more common, and unfortunately it's just the way of the world right now.
Cool. Okay, next question, next category, Mr. Martin Hall. It's you'll love this one, Martin. Which teacher, that's not with us on this planet anymore, is going on to the golf course in the sky, was your biggest influence?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt for me. I mean, I've had a lot of influences. I feel like I have a good bridge to
You
the
can go ahead
past.
and name a couple.
I can name more than one, but I would say the primary influence on me was John Jacobs. I got to spend a good amount of time with John, and so some people think that John's method of teaching by teaching strictly off the ball flight was a bit lightweight, and perhaps he didn't get into as much of the body action as he could have done, should have done. But I certainly agree with the words of John's wisdom echo in my mind that golf is what the ball does. And, you know, if you can control the ball, you're a good player. If you can't control the ball, if you can't hit the shots, and then you work it back from the club to the hands and arms to the body. And, you know, you can go either way. You can start with the body and work out to the club, or you can go with the club and work back to the body. But I think that John Jacobs knew more than people think. A lot of people berate him for saying that the ball started on the path and curve because of the club face. And I've actually got it in print that John said he knew that wasn't the case, but it was just a little easier pill for people to swallow when he started writing. How much harm does it do? Well, maybe a little bit. But I think as long as you flip that round, if we know the ball starts nearer to the face. Now, I think when TrackMan came out, they were telling us the ball started 95%, 90% on the face. I think that number seems to be changing. That's a floating number. And so I don't think anybody knows exactly what the percentage is, where it starts on the face, how much the path influences it. It would depend perhaps on the club you're using, on the speed you swing at. But I think it starts nearer the face than the path. But I definitely use a lot of John Jacobs stuff. I think Henry Cotton was terrific. He was a big influence on me. I met him one time, and, you know, his use of the hands and the wrists and the arms. And then Bob Toski, a huge influence on me also with the hands and arms. But having said all of that, the man sitting to the right, David Leadbetter, an equal influence on how the body contributes to so much of it too. And I mean, very recently, I spent a lot of time with Dr. Rob Neal, the biomechanics expert, and it's been great for me to understand and measure what the body does and when it does it, and look at models of really good players and actually see what they do as opposed to what they tell you they feel they do. I think we would all agree that when a pro says, I feel I do this, whatever this is, that may not at all be what they do. Now, it's not for me to say, well, that's wrong. I can't tell a player what to feel. It's like Sergio saying he pulls the club down like, you know, ringing a bell from the sky. Well, he said it doesn't look like it to me. It looks like that thing just sort of lays down and falls, and then perhaps he pulls on it with the body. So I would never argue with what a player says they feel. I like to measure. I've got a lot of technology. I like to measure what players do and get a good guess. I don't fully trust every piece of technology I've got. I think sometimes I say they're good. They're not God, but they're very helpful, whether they're launch monitors or whatever they may be. So, I mean, my influences are John Jacobs and what the ball does, and definitely David Leadbetter, Jimmy Ballard, very, very much Jim McLean. I'm not just saying that because those two are sitting there. They've both been huge influence on me. They've got top shelf of my library back there, by the way, boys. I've got all your books up there. So that's my story on who influenced me, Brian.
Any great answer there, Martin. Anybody got some people they want to name? David?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, we always talk about great players of the past. I don't think you talk enough about great teachers of the past. I mean, you go back to Ernest Jones and his devotee, Manuel de la Torre. And I mean, you know, you don't always have to agree with everything everybody says. But I mean, look, if you're going to be a great teacher, you need to be exposed to a lot of different information. And I mean, I remember when I first came out of the States, I think the PJ put on a seminar run by Gary Wyron, who himself is a really great teacher. We had Bill Strasbaugh, we had Jim Flick, we had Paul Berthelly, and some of you will remember those names. I remember Paul Berthelly was really intriguing. I mean, he had this little pole, a little bar that he used to sort of teach with. I mean, it was, even back then, it was hard to get through you know, the airport with it, you know, because this thing, when you do all these little drills, and that's really where actually I started thinking about drills and exercises, because I felt that, you know, if you can start to create, for want of a better term, muscle memory through utilizing these drills. Now, they weren't, I mean, I look back at it now, not all of them were great, but, you know, it's interesting. I mean, there are some tremendous teachers around, and as I say, I think as, you know, as Martin was saying, I mean, John Jacobs was, I mean, I've never seen anybody get any player, poor player, tour player, hit the ball quicker, better than John Jacobs. I mean, literally, he could turn his back and just listen to the sound of the strike and tell you what was going on. I mean, so pretty incredible intuition. I think that's the thing you spoke about, young teachers getting out there. You know, intuition, instinct takes a long time to develop, and I mean, I'm sure a lot of the guys here when you teach, I mean, you're not just going by the numbers. I mean, it's an instinct you have. You feel it, you sense it. I mean, all being players to some degree. I mean, you look at it and say, okay, what feeling did we have? Because, I mean, back in the day before we had video, that's really all we were using. So these great teachers of the past were, I mean, they had, I mean, Harvey Pennick, for instance, probably one of the greatest communicators ever. So I think we need to look at, and I think a lot of young teachers need to look back and study a little bit of history of the game from a teacher's perspective.
Michael Jacobs.
Thanks, Brian. I want to say hello
Hey.
to everybody. Thanks for joining us. So what's unique about our sport and our industry is it's one of the most written about in all of sports. So you can grab a book on the shelf and basically you can have a great player or a teacher basically write their memoirs of everything they did through the years. And you could span somebody's whole 40, 50-year career in a few hours reading their book, whether they be a player or a teacher, which to me has always been the best. So, you know, having the opportunity to publish things and write things and read what the other great teachers do is a big deal. And also, you know, a lot of people talk about technology and stuff, and I obviously use a lot of technology and all that, but you know, there's so much push towards everything you have to do has to be evidence-based, and this, it's more about being just evidence-led and using your intuition. So I think it's 50-50 intuition and being evidence-led. And you know what your gut tells you to do when you're good at something. So that's my opinion.
Anybody got any just a couple names to throw out there? I'll throw a Ben Doyle. Go ahead, Tom Rezendes. Tom Rezendes. Please open the mic for Tom Rezendes.
I was
There we go.
going to second Ben Doyle. He's the original guy that taught me about matchups and different components of working. So Ben Doyle.
Great. Okay, Kevin Walker. And Rick, go ahead, Kevin Walker.
No question, Jim McLean for me. I mean, that's where I really got my start as a teacher. I had already been a golf professional for about 10 years when I went to work for Jim. And it just set me on a whole nother trajectory. Learned a ton. He was so gracious and sharing information with me. Jimmy Ballard before that. So, and, you know, a lot of guys like that are still very relevant in the teaching world, not just in history, but changed the course of where I went.
And we had one more, Karen, go ahead.
Oh, hey. So, well, of course, Jim McLean and David Leadbetter, they're my mentors, and Brian, but I just want to add a couple of females in there since I'm here. Dee Dee Owens, the great Dee Dee Owens. She was a fantastic teacher. Also, Jane Frost, Deb Vangelo, and of course, Dana Rader have all been great teachers that I've learned from these other teachers as well. But, you know, I just want to echo what everybody's saying, that the teaching is really individual and you have to look at the student. And that's what we do at the LPGA. And all the teachers that are here right now do that. So I think that's really important, to look at the student and what the student wants to do as opposed to what we want to teach. And all the people that I've ever taken a lesson from or worked for, Jim and David, have always been concerned about what the student wants and how to produce that shot for that particular student and their body.
Rick Murphy and then Jim and then David. Rick, go ahead real quick.
Yeah, on teachers from the past, a couple of names, and I like what I've heard here. Flick, Toski, Berthley. I remember never drinking so much orange juice with raw eggs, because Paul would have you with this Berthley bar do isometric exercises and positions and hold and then release and take a divot. How deep can you take that divot with the left arm rotation? And so he was a character, a lot of fun. I learned a lot from him. And just talking about this, I'm realizing that the names, you know, Peggy Kirk Bell, Karen, you talked about DDO, and she was incredible. Whiffy Smith, how about Whiffy Smith way back in the day? And I think Tom Tomasello did a lot of teaching. I think he worked with Jody Mudd. I spent a lot of time with him, and also Lynn Blake in Atlanta.
He's still with us, so we're not putting him under yet. Jim, go ahead, Jim, real quick, and then David.
Well, one is Claude Harmon. I had a great chance to see Mr. Harmon at Wingfoot, and then down at Morningside in the desert in Rancho Mirage. So he was a phenomenal teacher and had so many great assistants. And his boys, of course, are all four of them are, three of them are still here for great teachers. And then Venturi, I spent 30 years with, but he did 35 years on the for CBS, and he taught a lot of tour players little things, but he spent a lot of time with a number of guys. John Cook for basically his whole life, and a lot with Watson that I saw, and Weiskopf.
David?
Echo what Karen said, because I think when you look back, probably especially the women teachers, a lot of them were really good players. You look at Patty Berg, for instance. I mean, if you ever listened to her give a clinic, I mean, it was phenomenal what she knew about the swing, and Mickey Wright as well. I mean, probably one of the greatest swingers in the history of the game. I mean, whether how much involvement she had in her own books, I don't know. But a lot of players. It's interesting when you look at the player-coach relationship. I mean, back in the day, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Ben Hogan actually had a coach, Henry Pickard. You know, and Henry Pickard won the Masters himself. So it's interesting where these players have come from and what they had to work with, and I mean, and hey, nothing beats talent, as they say, you know, so talent will work. And if you get the right thoughts and the right positive mojo going, I mean, a player's going to make it.
Okay, Kevin Weeks. I'll come from Ed and then Nick Clearwater. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'd like to reiterate what Karen said about Didi Owens. Getting to work with Dr. Owens at Cog Hill was just, for 2 years, was just absolutely amazing. And no one's mentioned any short game people. I'm a little offended here. I got to spend a whole lot of time at Grand Cypress with Phil Rogers, and he was absolutely special to learn the wedge game and how a wedge worked from Phil.
Nick Clearwater.
Sure. So Andy Plummer and Mike Bennett obviously taught me how to measure swing and then how to stand on a PGA Tour range and actually help players. It's tough to get a better education than those guys, but beyond that, I don't think I've talked about golf with either one of them for probably 7 or 8 years, because the technology that Michael Jacobs had just mentioned, between gears and AMM and force plates and 6 degrees of freedom, just everywhere, the data really drives everything about my teaching system now.
And Ibarguen. Ed Ibarguen is not.
Am I on?
Ed. Thanks for coming, Ed.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I was just going to mention Stuart Maiden, who was Bobby Jones's coach. But what strikes me about everybody's comments are that from the very first instruction in the history, and it's gone all the way to today, is that these are gatherers of information who are trying to cross the bridge to translating that into physical and mental performance. And we're still doing it today. And sadly, the history of teaching has been forgotten by so many. And instead, we're drinking from a fire hose of technology, where now I'm seeing teachers that are often giving lessons and confused because they've gathered all this information, but they're not sure exactly what to share with the student that's in front of them. So I think all those great teachers figured that out. They weren't necessarily teaching the same thing, but they were able to communicate to the person in front of them that helped them improve their performance. And that's, to me, what great teaching is.
Perfect. I'm going to throw one more name out there, Alex Morrison, right? So talking about the Henry Pickard. So Bill Harmon, what's the, you know, old school, but you've got tech. I know, because I see you building all the time. What's the best piece of tech you've ever used that you feel like, boy, I'm glad I have this now, and what have you tried? It may be a good product, but for you, it really, you didn't get much use out of it. Start with the best one.
Well, I would say that, I have flight scope, and my father used to say that the ball goes where the club face tells it. And I think modern technology has probably kind of proved that. I used to think it was 50-50 path and club face, and it appears that it's more club face. Martin Chuck's new plane mate has been very good training aid. And if I could say something about what Karen said about Dee Owens, I did a teaching seminar with her, I don't know, 100 years ago at the Olympic Club. And it dawned on me that I was a teacher and she was an educator. She was much smarter than I was, and she had kind of better educational skills than I had. And I learned from her, without her knowing it, that you had to learn how to educate people. And I came more from a background, this is what you do and that's the way it is, and go from there. But I like the technology. To me, helps for some reason fit people and drivers better. It seems like every amateur I have come in contact with does not have a driver that's even close to being good form. And so I still find that I like the technology, and we have generations of people that enjoy the technology, so they want it and they demand it. But I'm still kind of on the cusp of the hands-on. And I think if you really wanted to improve, I think playing lessons and short game is the easiest way to do it.
Cool. Anybody with their favorite piece of tech? Mike Perpich, and then Chuck, Martin Chuck.
Well, just backing up Mr. Harmon there, I think what the technology for me does is kind of confirm to the student, you know, the player, what you're already trying to get them to do and why they're seeing what they're seeing. So I kind of use it to help give confidence in the player that, okay, that's what he said was going to happen, why it's going to happen. So I think it can be used as a confidence builder also.
Cool. Jeff Smith. Coming to you, Rick Silva, next.
I'd like
Jeff
to
Smith.
jump in on this one. I'd like to reiterate what Mike just said. The technology, whether it be the launch monitor or the force plate or the K-Vest, not only is it helping us as teachers because it verifies what we're talking about, because the players these days that I see, especially the younger ones, are so in tune to technology in their life everywhere, and they trust it. It is part of them. The older generation doesn't necessarily adapt to that as well, but the younger people, they are digital natives, where people our age are digital immigrants. We gathered it in, we learned how to use it. They were born with this stuff, and it is part of how they learn. It is part of how they think that we know what we're talking about. And so you know, I think my favorite piece of tech, it's getting close between the launch monitor and the force plates, but I think it's the launch monitor because it talks club to ball and what's about to happen. And I can tell them, and the technology actually helps me tell them what's going to happen, and then they see it happen, and the believability factor that we then have, that they really jump on board and they improve so much faster.
Cool. Rick Silva. Then Barton, I'm sorry. Rick Silva. Still muted.
There you go.
There we go.
Hey, everybody. Hands down, the best piece of technology that I've been very privileged to use over the last couple of years is Mike Jacobs, Jacobs 3D. You know, the work that he and Dr. Steve has done is just hands down second to none. However, what it's been able to help myself, and I know others do, is just cut through the noise and to ultimately look and to help communicate to clients of any skill set, you know, no, this is really important, this is kind of important, this is really not important at all. And I would say even more important than that is actually how to communicate it really cleanly, really simply, and just get right at it with people. So I would say hands down, more so than any launch monitor, more so than any pressure plate, boom, it's single-handedly the greatest thing that's ever impacted communication.
Right,
boom, done.
Okay, Martin Chuck, real quick, and then we'll get to the next one.
Yeah, just I think it supports an argument. You know, you say, what thing do I use every time I have a lesson? Well, I don't use anything every time, but a launch monitor for sure, just for a few minutes, just to kind of support my argument for a student. I can't tell how many people say, oh, I'm over the top, and they're really not. It's a face issue. So sometimes when you need to have a support, show them what's going on, then I put it away, and then we get more into the hands-on coaching. This is what it feels like. This is what it looks like. I'm a big fan of external stuff that people feel. And then maybe I can validate that, go back to the machine later on, whether it's force plates, gears, launch monitor. But I think it's support an argument, go to work as a coach, be a communicator. And then if you have to check back in or measure and track progress, you can do that.
You'll have a shot, Kevin, on this question that kind of comes up again a little bit later, but I want to get to the next one, and I'm just going to start throwing in the order y'all appear here. So Karen, this one's for you. So there's a few of these questions here on the list. We're at first quarter's over here, so we got a bunch more questions we won't get to, but I'm going to try to handpick the good ones. So this is one of the ones that I think is a quick hitter. I want to hear Karen elaborate a little bit, but I'd like to see a bunch more people just vote a little bit and editorialize less on this one, because it's an easy one. Okay, so we're talking about the takeaway now. Okay, we're taking this club away. You can go in hands and in club, kind of like Sam Snead. You can go in hands and out club, more like Johnny Miller. You can go out hands with a somewhat in club, like David Toms. You can go out and out like Matt Wolf and Miller Barber. So Karen, the takeaway, what is there one that works for you best, or you might use any one of them in any given lesson?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and that's very appropriate for me, because I've actually been working on my own takeaway for myself. I even as a teacher, I had something in my mind of the way I thought the takeaway should be, and it appears that I was doing it incorrectly. So, basically, I really think it's important to have people understand that square club face for their body and also for their grip. So you have to take a look at their grip, and does that club face match the grip as they take it away. So it just depends on the person. It depends on their body. It depends on a lot of different things. So I don't really think there's like one way to take it away, but I definitely think that you have to determine with that student what's square. And I think the universal checkpoint is sort of that halfway back or 3/4 of the way back. And I think a lot of people don't even know how they take it back or where to even stop or where that is. So as a teacher, I think that halfway back, 3/4 of the way is really important to make sure that club face and that grip and that takeaway match.
Anybody got a vote here? Martin Hall. Martin Hall, mic open. There we go.
For me, I think that we all have a default setting in how we get the club on the ball, and some of us fade it, and some of us pull it, and some of us come down steep, and some come down shallow. So I think we all have a default setting, and you can build the takeaway around that. I don't think there's any one perfect takeaway. We all know that. So if somebody did come too much over the top, giving them a Matthew Wolf takeaway might be a good thing. It might help them come from the inside. If somebody was woefully from the inside, copying Sam Snead, where you're a bit low and around in the backswing and cover it with your upper body, might work. So I think the takeaway is connected to the previous shots you've been hit, and you can use the takeaway as a fix for your ball flight.
Anybody? Rick Murphy, then Ed.
I think that the first 2 or 3 feet of the backswing is probably one of the most important things for amateurs. I'm not talking about tour players, as you were mentioning, hands out, head in, hands in, head out. I'm talking about for the average golfer that I see every day. I think a lot of mistakes are made from startup to shaft level. So I spend a lot of time with my students helping them understand if they've got the rotation and it's too much, and yaw in the backswing, they'll see it immediately when I use the airplane attached to the shaft, Michael. That's one of the things that's helped me the most in my teaching is with that, keeping the wings level, no roll. And I've helped a lot of students significantly over the last few months, just spending some time
Ed?
I was simply
1
going to say,
second.
having watched most of you teach on here, and the best teachers I've ever watched teach have all tried to get as few compensations as possible for that student in their swing. And so and within that belief, then the backswing setting up the downswing. So, you know, I don't necessarily think that you would want to change Freddie Couples' takeaway, for example, when you see how he's delivering the club through the ball. So I know it makes people sick to hear it, but it would depend. And I do believe that one thing that doesn't depend in is that fewer compensations, the better, that the student has to make.
Oh, good answer, Ed. Tony Ruggerio, babes. 1 second, Tony. Opening your mic. There you go.
I just, when I'm teaching, I don't get too far away from the face of the club very often and pay a lot of attention to the face. And I think that Bill was talking earlier about the average golfers, you know, so if a guy's got a real shut face or a real open face, you know, I find that a lot of times you can't just use one takeaway. You can help them fix club face issues or fix ball flight issues with their takeaway off the ball. So I think, you know, for me, I just tend to stick very close to what the club face is and what we're trying to match it up with, like Martin said, with the shot they're trying to hit.
I want to ask a follow-up here to David on this takeaway thing. David, do you see in the last couple of years, it's almost like being almost okay now for better players to take it back a little more in, like Snead and Bobby Jones? It seems to be a little bit less, oh, I have to take it back a certain way. Is that what you're seeing? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it always has been with good players, great players, that they've had a variety of move-aways, takeaways, whatever you want to term it. I think Martin Hall knows what a takeaway is, but something to do with Chinese. But anyway, the fact is that I think when you look at it, say a Raymond Floyd or a Nancy Lopez, for instance, okay, those are two, you know, great players, but there's a hands out and head in type deal. And so, I mean, probably Raymond Floyd was very much based on his build more than anything else. But I do think, you know, and I know Jim calls it the move of death. I think you call it the death move, you know, that we see amateurs who the first thing they do is take it back with their hands. The club's gone behind them. And from there on, I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to lift and get the club out of position. So to me, I would say if I had to sort of break it down percentage-wise, I would say 90% of golfers, I would work the deal where the hands are in and the club head is out, just because of the fact it allows them, I think, to synchronize the move away. And also it gets their body involved at a very early stage. I think the whole thing is that's why I don't like the word takeaway so much, because it really does infer that you sort of move it just purely back with your hands, where we know there's an involvement with the core, with the bigger muscles in order to get the club moving. The old drill. I just want to say the old drill. I mean, I got it from somewhere. I can't remember who, but you know, when you stuck the club in your navel and I think it was maybe Jimmy Ballard. I think that did it.
Jimmy Ballard, sure.
Yeah, and so you know, you just even for a very short movement, as the middle moved, you could see where the club head was relative to the hands.
You got anything on this, Jim?
Me? Oh yeah. Well, you know, I love the positions, but. Yeah, David said there's a lot involved, and there's a little movement forward. Could be an obvious forward press or a slight micro move toward the target before you take it away. There's some kind of waggle, getting things relaxed to move things in synchronization going away. Mr. Harmon was great with amateurs, and he taught me something, just to throw this in, that I used with a lot of amateurs, and that was to get the club a little bit behind the hands and get it a little bit shut at the halfway back, which I've used a lot of times because, as David said, you know, when you flop that face over, when you roll it up behind you, you know that it's over, really. And, you know, that's something I'm going to change immediately.
Cool. Okay. Next question, Mike Perpich. We're going right down the line right there. What's the best business decision you ever made in your golf instruction career?
March 1st, 1999. I had been a head golf professional at 3 different clubs and got most of those jobs through because I was a good teacher, and worked out a deal at River Pines Golf and became full-time, left everything behind, became a full-time teacher and an independent contractor. And I thank God every day I did that. So it's
Awesome.
changed my life. That's for sure.
Anybody got another best business move they ever made? Kevin Walker and then Jeff.
So Jim can relate to this one. I was the head golf professional at Doral when Jim came in there, and I had a 2.5-year-old and an almost newborn, and I was given the opportunity to go from being the head professional to being a full-time instructor for Jim, which meant no salary, no benefits. You're just independent contractor. And that was a leap of faith when you've got a baby coming in 3 months and things like that. And it just changed everything for me. So it was scary, but it was the best business decision I ever made. Thank you, Jim.
Anybody got another one, Jim?
I was just waving at Kevin there, from the old days. Business decisions. I made a lot of bad decisions.
Go ahead and give us one.
Well, I bought the golf course. I bought the golf course in Texas, which was a great thing in my life, but it was a costly one. It's not easy to own a golf course. I'd recommend not buying a golf course.
I'll write that down.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff Smith, and then Tom. We go. Okay, Jeff. Quick.
I think the best business decision I ever made as a golf professional, as an instructor, was something that I still do today, and it's I continue to invest in myself. I investigate the technology that I'm going to use. I try to find a place for it, but I keep investing in education. I don't stop, and I try to find education that comes from a completely different angle to find out if that can make me a better teacher. So I think that the best decision I ever made was investing in myself.
Cool. Bernie, and then Tom Rezendes, and then we'll go to the next question. Go ahead, Bernie.
Yeah, what I'd say to everyone, I was very fortunate early in my career. I got a chance to spend a lot of time with a great player, Wayne DeFrancesco. I got to watch Wayne teach a lot. And along with Wayne, I got to spend some time with Mac O'Grady very early in my career. And between the two of them, I got a lot of information relating to the geometry of the swing. But then I went out and spent a lot of time watching great communicators. So much like everyone on this panel, we've had a lot of influences. I was fortunate. My first actual video lesson was with David Leadbetter. One of my students today, back when I was 15, took me to David. David probably doesn't remember, but I looked like a pretzel when I came in for the first lesson. But David helped me understand the structure of a good swing. And then, throughout our careers, and especially in my situation, I was fortunate through all the people I met to get more and more ideas on how to communicate, because you can have great information, but you got to know how to tell the story to get through to your students. And to me, if you can watch great teachers, that's one thing. If you can observe what works and what doesn't work, you can take that back and apply it and do really good things with your students.
Great, Tom. And next question's for you anyway, but go ahead, Tom. What's your best business decision? Go open Tom's mic, please.
So for me, the big one for me was moving indoors. So just the freedom I got in scheduling and not being dependent on weather and time of day, what day it is, if the driving range needs to be aerated, whatever it might be. That and surrounding myself with a good team and being in a somewhat affluent community.
Cool. Okay, so you got the next one. What's the best book for new golfers? If you were going to recommend a book for a relatively new golfer, what would you recommend? I'd like to hear a lot of answers on this. Shouldn't take that long to just tell you the book.
Book for a new golfer.
Yeah, relatively new golfer. It doesn't have to be never had a club, never had a lesson. Just, somebody's been playing for a year, they're interested, they're going to buy some clubs, and you're going to tell them, hey, I think you really ought to read what?
I'm gonna say the Stack and Tilt book. and then Science of the Golf Swing by Michael Jacobs. I don't know if a newbie would quite grasp the kinetics part of it. But.
Let's get some votes on the best book for a new golfer. Who's got one? Kevin Walker.
Golf is not a game of perfect.
Golf's not a game of perfect. Okay, Kevin Weeks. Not open mic yet. Kevin Weeks. Mr. Chris, Kevin Weeks. Okay, Kevin, go ahead. Sorry. Kevin Weeks, go ahead.
Kevin Walker took my answer.
Okay, sounds good. Who else has got one? Tony?
I would say Harvey Penick's Little Red Book has got a lot of great stories, anecdotes, and simple lessons that anybody that's beginning or relatively beginning before they get head over heels into it could learn from and advance as a player.
Anybody got another one that hadn't come up yet? Martin Hall, you got some books behind you. And then David.
Yeah, I've got one or two, but for a newcomer, for a beginner, I think Understanding the Golf Swing by Manuel de la Torre. It's simple, it's straightforward, it doesn't cover the sort of stuff you and Michael cover, but for a beginner, I think it's very good.
What about David?
My favorite instruction book, really, and the only one of them was Percy Boomer on learning golf, because I think it's a combination technical, spiritual. It's a wonderful book, and I think a lot of people can get a lot out of it. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it.
Jim? Then we'll go to Ed.
I think the Little Red Book would be, I'd vote on that one.
Okay, Ed? Ibarguen.
A great beginning book for somebody that isn't that familiar with the game would be Practical Golf by John Jacobs. Like that's a real standard piece of instruction.
Martin Chuck? Great answer, Ed.
Natural Golf Swing by George Knudsen. My mentor is a goodie. Good stuff in there.
Good. I got a vote on this one now. I'm gonna go Jack Nicklaus, Lesson T and Playing Lessons. How about them apples? Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say my two mentors, David's book, The Golf Swing, and then of course Jim's classic book, Golf Drills are great. Two great books right there.
Rick Silva.
You know, Erica Larkin's book that she put out 2 years ago was pretty reasonable. It was pretty good.
Okay, you're stay with us, Rick. You're the you're the next you're next up here. We're gonna go back to swing mechanics here. Backswing position. This is a relatively quick one. Just pretty flat, somewhere in the middle, or upright. There's a whole bunch of divides still on this. It's amazing that everybody thinks there's maybe only one way to do that. But just on the simple uprightness or flatness of the backswing, what do you prefer?
More upright than flat.
More upright than flat. Cool. Anybody got one there? Hey, Ed Ibarguen.
Well, I'd say a lot of it is your body structure, length of your arms, but I'm with Rick. I like flatter shoulders, higher arms. I think is a nice place to try and start.
Rick, you had something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I'd like to give a little context to why. So based off of what Ed put there, and I think it's a very valid point. Not as a quick hitter, and I won't be too big, but in the whys, and it has to do with, like, I think trends and what we see, and it's kind of like the tide. This goes this way, this goes this way. People being highly rotary, the industry as a whole confusing pelvis with things that aren't pelvis, and hips that aren't hips, and I think when people start to get overly rotary, we don't get enough lift as it is, and chaos ensues. So that's why if you have to choose one, I'm going to go with more up than flat. But, yeah.
You had one, Mr. Jacobs? You had one there?
You could look at it as upright or flat and how the arms move and all that. But I think it has a lot to do with where the position of the center of mass of the club is. You know, if you took a club and you balanced it on your finger, where it would balance somewhere on that line, where that is up at top of the swing. Because if you don't, let's say on the backswing, if you don't move that up enough, and let's say you take it low and around, you're going to have to move it out on the way down. So I think if more people paid attention to that, they would become more successful.
Bernie?
All these players that we see at the club level have different range of motion issues. A tour player, a really good amateur, they can move a lot of times places the vast majority of golfers can't. So I end up with a blend of players where I teach, and I've got to go with the path that they can move in. So I might have someone with lower arms because they have a shoulder issue, and I'll use a deeper hand path. But if I had my druthers, I think you can hit it longer with higher hands. I mean, I think if you look at history, most of the high-speed players have a bigger arc, more upright swings, but you got to play the hand you're dealt, and sometimes that means swinging more around, and sometimes it means swinging more up and down.
So that next question is for Rick Murphy. Sorry, Karen, we'll get you next time. Rick, you're next up on the deal here, and this is a question Nick Clearwater will be interested in. So, what do you think about the franchised, strip mall, Golf Tech model as a teaching platform? A, and B, do you think that there is room for either a Burger King to the McDonald's or some higher end, like obviously Golf and Body in New York, some kind of a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse version? What do you think about because it's a big trend in the industry. They give more lessons than anybody else. So is there room for anybody else, and what would that somebody else be?
That's a great question, Brian. And I know Golf Tech is the largest employer of PGA members that teach the game of golf. And Joe and Nick, I think they've done a tremendous job in training their instructors. There's several PGA members that are working there. I'm not sure there's a space for another Golf Tech, so to speak. I think they've done a hell of a job there. And
I'm gonna go ahead, Karen. Good answer, Rick.
No, I just want to throw this out there. So a lot of people, so obviously I'm on the LPGA, and I've been to Korea. We've taught a lot of Korean teachers the LPGA method. Obviously the LPGA is very big in Korea, and people ask me, why are they so good over there? Well, I don't know if you've heard this, but they actually have swing simulators all over the country. They have more swing simulators than we have Starbucks. So these are people going to the grocery store, to the mall, that don't play golf, that probably will never play golf, but they get on the swing simulators and they swing, and they all have these perfect swings. And obviously in the last few years, they've probably produced the best LPGA players. So, just throwing that out there, the more of these kind of mall things you say might be a good thing for us to produce more golfers. We might get a person that might not have gone to a golf course or to a Top Golf, but we might get them at the grocery store. So that's something to think about.
As sort of a side question to this, I like to ask this to Jim and then to David. Not putting you guys on the other side of the hill now. Just hear me out here. Don't shoot the messenger. So if you guys were younger and y'all both had extremely, and still do, successful businesses, but if y'all were a little bit further, behind, where y'all are in y'all's evolution on this planet, would you? Y'all done multiple golf schools all over the world, both of y'all. Would y'all do something like this? Do you think that the Jim McLean model or the David Leadbetter model that y'all use for golf schools would have been doable in a Golf Tech franchise type scenario? Go ahead, Jim, first, and then David.
Interesting question. I think that's possible. Both David and I kind of had a system for teaching. I think I've got a very broad system within corridors that a lot of people can teach within and be comfortable. And the fundamentals that we look at in the golf swing. So, yeah, you know, it's, you know, with COVID-19, you know, the world is changing. I think it's going to change forever in America. I don't think we're ever going to have the same America as we had just recently. And virtual golf is going to be more important. I think, you know, with the schools that I've had, David's had more. I've had quite a few in and out of the country, and it's been fun to do that. Be tough to do as much as Golf Tech, but it's an interesting question. I think it could have done it.
David?
Well, actually, we're sort of doing it right now. I've hooked up with a company called Golf Zone, which is the biggest simulator company in Korea. So to back up what Karen was saying, I mean, it's amazing. You know, the price of land over in Korea obviously is really expensive. I mean, the demographics are such that, you know, you've got to go out of town 30, 40 miles to play a game of golf. So these kids grow up on simulators now, and it's amazing. I mean, you know, this Golf Zone, they've created equipment where they can change the lies. I mean, and you know, they've got indoor professional men's and women's tours that are televised. But that's how big it is over there, and it's slowly but surely starting to come to the rest of the world. I mean, I still think that tradition plays a huge role over in the States and probably parts of Europe, UK, etc., where players want to get outside. But if you grow up with it, if you've never been, as Karen was saying, I mean, you've got scratch handicap golfers who've never ever played outdoors. I mean, it's incredible to say, but that's the case. So, and I think to a certain extent, I mean, I think it's easier teaching indoors to some extent. People, even on a simulator, players aren't as concerned. Listen, you don't lose a ball in the simulator, right? So I mean, people aren't as concerned. And I think from a confidence standpoint, it's amazing. So we're doing some things with this company called Golf Zone, where players can go in literally, not so much on the Golf Tech model, but whereby it's almost like self-teaching, where you can go in and get your drills, get your exercises, work on it, and then go and play around a golf. So it really is interesting. I think things will change, and as Jim was saying, you know, with this Corona deal, I mean, people are going to feel that, you know, they don't want to travel as far. They want to, you know, if you're in downtown Chicago, you want to be in a place where you can just zip in and go out and, you know, have some fun. I mean, it's maybe not the real thing, not what we've grown up with, but it's what you get used to. And I say if you started off at a young age, I think kids will get used to it. And I mean, we may have a world indoor tour shortly.
Cool. Nick, you want to add anything to this? I was kind of dancing around your company there, but
no, you're doing great, Brian, and I applaud you for pulling this off. I thought with 50 people, this would be a total magic show. You're doing awesome. No, we got 212 locations, 800 coaches. We hire 200 new ones all the time. We're always growing. We're at probably 40% of our capacity that we believe throughout the world. This thing's just getting bigger and bigger and better every year. So what we really promise coaches, though, is that we'll give them an education that they can take with them anywhere they want, whether they want to work with Golf Tech or not. We'll teach them how to teach golf, and then give them thousands of repetitions to do it. So they're getting good at their job. We have 800 coaches. Not all of them are awesome. Not all of them should be on a phone call like this, but they're all pretty eager to learn. And we turn and churn out a bunch of good teachers every single year. So I appreciate a bunch of the kind words here, but there is a business for this because people aren't looking for always their golf instruction or looking to go to a golf course to get better. They're looking for someplace that's convenient. And that's really what we're trying to offer there. And then the last part is about 75 to 80% of our lessons, Brian, are actually indoors. The rest, we use affiliations with other golf courses because it is just as important to be outside.
Absolutely. Rick, real quick, man, we got to get going, but go ahead. Rick Silva, there you go.
Competition is an interesting word there. I don't think in the direct competition marketplace, I don't think so. I think in a pivoting competition, yes, I think there is room. So real quick answer, that's how I'll answer that. I think they have that market covered. I think they're doing good.
Michael Jacobs, next man up. Okay, so try to do my best right here. All right. You see a lot of back swings look like this, sort of a right arm under look.
Okay.
And this move right here is very popular on the social medias. And I really want a lot of folks to weigh in on the lay down seeming craze. I've used that word. Michael, this happens to be your question. So what do you think about that move, and what are you seeing when folks come to you, and is there certain cases where it might be okay for a player to do?
Okay, so let's cover one little thing here. I'll use a water bottle as a golf club since I don't have one handy, believe it or not. So regardless of where the club is, what you have to understand is when you're gripped and you're getting ready to swing, the action that you make is the action that you make. So what I mean by that is if I did what you just described up at the top of the swing and then I made this move, I believe you were saying, this move on the way down, if you come back to where that would be at impact, let's say, or even address, you'll see that the action that you did is actually, it's this action. So when you go to do that two-dimensional down the line move where you try to bring your hands out this way and try to so-called lay the club down, the action that you're actually putting on the club is to forward lean it and make the club kind of yaw back this way. So when you do that, that's ultimately what you're doing. And it's not shallowing the club. It might be shallowing the club in when you're looking at it on the camera and all of a sudden it's more level to the ground than it's like this, but to the golfer club system, which is all that matters, it's actually this action. So if you did something more along the lines of right around this point of the downswing where you started to switch ends on the bottle this way and got the club to move like this, you're more likely to lay it down in a better position because that action is so-called laying the club down. So I think what people have gotten confused about is seeing things in swings and seeing things on video. And if there's anything based on all the research we've done for the past 10 years is you can't get around the action of the golfer club system. And it doesn't matter where it is in the swing. If it's wrapped around and it gets complicated up there when your arms are twisted above your shoulder, but whatever action you make, you have to relate it back to what it actually is. So I think that's the reference frame people should look at. That's my opinion on that subject.
Anybody got anything on the lay down? Come on now, gee, you gotta be kidding me. See no hands going up. Rick Murphy.
Yeah, I would just
You
say.
worried about the lay down police? Are you? Go ahead, Rick.
See so many players, first timers come out and I'm working with them and trying to get to know them better and what they think about their golf swing. And they say, okay, I think I've got to do this with the shaft. I'm trying to lay this thing down so I won't come over the top. Well, getting them to get the club going in this direction at the start of the downswing, the right arm extending has changed their golf swings almost instantly. So yeah, I think.
Cool. You had a club there, Martin Chuck? I see a club in your hand, so I figured you have something to say.
You know, I'll join in on Rick, you know, and Michael there. The club is working sort of outward in the plane of the lead arm. That club's gonna probably go on a pretty good spot. You know, I think there's been a lot of good information. Somebody mentioned earlier about Sergio feeling like he pulls the handle down, which would certainly steepen things. But then there's been a lot of great stuff like David Leadbetter in his book, you know, there's more of the A swing was more of a hands in club out, which got the shaft a bit more vertical. And when it's a bit more vertical, it has a chance when you unwind for it to go behind you a little bit and shallow out. So I find that I have success if I'm helping somebody develop a better backswing, you know, starting motion, George Knudsen used to say, if I can get the golfer in a place where they have an opportunity for the weight of the club to work with the rotation, that club will go in a better spot. Now, sometimes they might have a really goofy club face and then they're going to respond to that face and I might have to make a grip change or a wrist condition change because we always respond to that thing right there. But in this group, I think that, you know, there's been an awful lot of exaggerated that behavior, no question. Even the gizmo I sell, people go and they do this crazy, and I'm not looking for crazy, I'm looking for subtle awarenesses to let the weight of the club get a little bit behind the golfer, a sliver, so that they can feel an orbit rather than something that they're responding to late. They don't want to get any response late out of there.
Cool. Anybody got anything else on this? David?
Yeah, it's been a subject that's been spoken about for a long time. And I think probably one of the most confusing statements, if you think back years ago when Jack Nicklaus said, well, I try to hit it from the top. And so essentially what he's trying to do is get the club head to catch up. I mean, because if we look at so many players, I mean, youthful players as well, players who have a very aggressive body motion where the right arm can get tucked and the club gets stuck behind them. And we say, once again, I think we're talking about two systems maybe for rules for players now. From amateurs and bifurcation as we're talking about it, I think there needs to be some bifurcation in golf instruction because, the average player trying to do this where, in the end, it's like, how well does this player's body work? I mean, are they able just to put the club in this position? Yeah, they might get in the mirror and do it, but sure as heck, they're not going to do it when the ball's there. And so it's a very interesting thing. To me, it's like if you get the club in balance and the body starts to move in a way that we know it should, in other words, you get the right sequence of motion, the club should start to lay down. And then it's a matter of, hey, how you synchronize the movement with the body. So, I think it's trying to force positions once again. I know players do it, and talented players can obviously achieve certain things, but I think once again, we've got to be careful who we're teaching.
Jim McLean, follow-up question to this. So if you look back at the last just 20 years, you've been doing it a lot longer, 40 years, right? 40 something. But the last 20 years, so, the folks that are watching and say, oh, they're talking about, when people were playing with persimmon. Hey, let's just talk about the last 20 years. Of all the players that come to see you, right, all the aspiring players, right, they really do have tour talent, but they just maybe didn't have it, or they at the time didn't have it, so they came to see you, all the way up to the very best, most famous players you've ever taught. If you take that group in the last 20 years, were more players that came to you too laid down or too steep on the downswing?
Well, by far the club professionals and players that having trouble get the club stuck behind them too far from the inside. You have a two-way miss. You can miss it to the out to the right, and then the next one you hit a giant hook in the left trees, and it's impossible to play tournament golf that way. So obviously, I think because there's a backswing plane and a downswing plane, and there's most players by far shallow the club slightly, but a lot of pretty good players, a lot of club professionals especially, tend to lay the club down too much, get it stuck behind them. And that's something that, and especially kids, they're very active with their lower body and their legs run out from them. And they, it's great for a while. I can think of Lexi Thompson, really dropped it underneath and hit nice draws and hooks until she got a little bit older. And then, had to get rid of that massive, too far behind swing. So that's what I would say is that, yeah, there's a downswing plane that's different from your backswing plane, and you change the direction, and the big mistake for a good player is too far underneath.
Absolutely. Martin Hall and then Bill Harmon. Go ahead, Martin.
So, yeah, obviously there is an epidemic of trying to shallow the shaft, and, some people have done well with it, but I would say as golf instructors across the board, not this eminent group that are here, but in general, it would do no harm to have a look at Bernhard Langer, who has steepened the shaft his entire life and still continues to steepen the shaft slightly at start down. It would do no harm to look at Gary Woodland, who can bash the cover off the ball, who steepens the shaft at start down. So, shallowing the shaft has its place, but just being a touch. Rory steepens it. I've stood next to him, watched him do it. Rory steepens it slightly and then shallows it late. So, look, it can work. I don't think steepening the shaft a hair as you start down is the end of the world, not by any means.
Bill Harmon.
At the older players, so many of them kind of took it inside and then maybe came a little bit on top of their backswing plane, and then the symmetry police.
Bill, it sure didn't look like your dad laid it down too much.
No, and but you guys look like it, Arnold Palmer and Sam Snead and stuff, and you look at where their shaft was halfway back, but there was nobody there to tell them that that was wrong and they couldn't play that way. And so I think that David alluded to it earlier. I think, some people just have a lot of talent and they know their swing and they can do it their way. My buddy Jay Haas was the opposite. He took it so far outside, it was unbelievable. And I remember one time when I was caddying for him, I had this brilliant notion that I was going to get him to take it back on plane. And he could do it, but then he dropped it about 50 yards to the right on the downswing. He couldn't break 80. And after a week, I said, forget that. That ain't going to work, because he had this highly intricate, complex timing system where he could put the club on the ball just beautifully. And when he came on tour, I believe Jim McLean showed him photographs that said from waist high to waist high, he was very close to Ben Hogan. But they were not even close, let's say halfway back. So I always think we got to be careful with really good players. Sometimes they're just good their way, and you got to be careful what you change, I think, with elite players, because if someone told Snead he wasn't going to be any good aiming right and take it inside, and his character Trevino comes up, he's aiming 50 yards left and taking it over here. If someone would have told him, no, you can't be a good player that way, we might not have ever heard of these guys. So I think that we all have preferences. I know Butch hates lag and narrowness, but I think with the elite players, you have to be very careful what you teach, because they're already pretty good. I think Justin Rose is interesting to me, because when he was playing his best golf, he was practicing some kind of hands in front. Now he's doing the lay down thing in his rehearsal swings. He's not playing as good. So I don't know which one he's going to go. When's he going to go back to the old one is what I want to know.
Good answer. Ed, I'll finish up with this one, and you're the next question. So go ahead and answer this one, and then I'll go to the next one.
So the thing we can't get around is what the instrument that's being swung. And so how it's going to be delivered can be done, as history has proven, in a million different ways. And I think what ends up happening right now, what I'm seeing is the laydown can work with a lot of other things happening in it that's going to end up delivering the club well through impact. But if you don't have that combination of things, like getting your arms up or getting into your right side or not getting too far in front when you're trying to turn through it. I mean, so that's the beauty of golf, the game. And then as far as teachers, that's why it's important that you should go watch people teach that are teaching something different than you are. And you should spend a lot of time gathering information and learning the latest technology. And if you can get around a gear system, to spend time with it. And I think, the problem is people get a little piece of information and then they either exaggerate or they don't know how to use it.
Okay, that next question for everybody, starting with Ed, is what have you not done in your teaching career that you absolutely would like to do before you hang them up?
Take my 3 favorite students to a round of golf at Augusta National. That would be fun.
Ooh, that's a good one. Anybody got an answer or something they'd like to do in their teaching career that they haven't done? I can't imagine some of these Hall of Famers in here, but Tony, what about you? What's something that you haven't done yet? You've been doing this a long time like me, and you've been successful, but what's something that you would hope to be able to do before you pack it down?
That's a great question. I mean, kind of like Ed said, I mean, I think the things that I get the most joy out of now are when I'm going to play golf with friends and play at great places. So I think I would enjoy going with some of my students who I think if you're close to, it's a relationship business, and some of the folks that I teach become very close with. I just would enjoy going to some of the special places that I have access to through teaching good players and so forth to play golf. I've been fortunate to play Augusta once. I mean, that would be up there pretty high, but I would also like to take a trip with some of my good students, a couple of the tour players that I'm real close with, over to Scotland and play some golf. I mean, I think it'd be fun to do that away from the tournament.
Awesome. And perfect, Martin, because you're the next question, but go ahead and answer that one and I'll throw you the next question.
I've had the privilege of doing golf schools with a few of you guys, and Karen, not you, but I'd love to. But I just love working with other coaches. You know, it's fantastic to listen. Brian, when you came out to Phoenix, I got to work with Jim. I've worked with Michael Jacobs. We've had an absolute hoot helping Martin Hall, of course, a few times. It's a blast to kind of work together. Now, what I would like to just go be a student for 3 days, you know, and just take it in, listen, work on my game, hit shots with caring coaches, because that's what I think I am, as a caring coach. When I'm around a caring coaches provide information they feel is going to help. I want to work hard. I'd like to go to a golf school. Seriously, and just work hard for 3 days.
Cool. Okay, so here's the next question. And go ahead, Bill, real quick. Get 30 seconds.
I like what Martin said. I've been taking lessons from good teachers, Mike Bennett and Dana Dahlquist, and just a bunch of different guys. And I've been really enjoyed it. And it's helped me become a better teacher. It's a little bit of a better player, but a better teacher. And I'm kind of tired of what I know, to be honest with you. I want to know what you guys know. And I can't do that just sitting in my teaching center, you know, hitting balls in front of the video. So I've learned a lot from everybody. You won't know it, but I spend a lot of time researching now. And the one thing that I think we should all want to do is to make sure that our profession is better off than it was when we started. And I really think that's our biggest responsibility.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, Martin, next question. You're going to love it. It just happened to come to you. I'm not fudging these questions. This is a golf instruction history. What do you think of the golfing machine, and what influence has it had on you? You didn't have to reach far.
Didn't have to reach far. So yeah, there you go. I think, you know, it's everybody talks about matchups nowadays, right? Well, I think the golfing machine was the first like book of matchups. There's is it a perfect book? No, it's not a perfect book. Is there some merit to understanding the weight of the club and the stress it puts into your hands? Is it defined like pressure points and how you can use pressure points to convey feels so that people can go, oh, I can feel the weight of the club stress against the hands. I can feel rotation. I can feel, you know, we use different words now, extension, ulnar deviation, radial deviation, these different things. The golf machine didn't coin it that way. But I think as a coach, certainly, you know, my era, George Knudson was my coach. He passed away when I was 20 years old. My next big influence was a golfing machine coach, Mark Evershed, who helped me a lot, right? So I think it's something that as a coach, it's nice to know. Do I quote the book when I teach somebody? Not at all. Do I use little snippets and feels, extensor action, and different things that have been paramount to helping me become a decent communicator? 100%. So I think there's a great place in golf coaching for the golf machine.
Anybody else wants it? Okay, Mike Perpich is a great person for this.
Well, I just want to tag on to what Martin said. I mean, I was 6 feet from Mr. Kelly when he died. I was one of the first persons up on stage. He was giving a speech in Macon, and I mean, I went through all the swinging, hitting schools. Mike Holder and I took our master's test together with Tom Tomasello. So info, like all other info, can it be, you know, is it perfect or not? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But what the golf machine did do, it helped me start to just organize things in my head. So I've been, you know, was around Mac O'Grady a lot. I grew up with Jody Mudd. So, and I was always around not only good players, but great players. Fuzzy Zeller, Eddie Mudd, Jody Mudd, Frank Beard, Bobby Nick. They were older than I, but it really helped me show me that I need to organize everything and kind of compartmentalize it. And it helped me become a better teacher. That's for sure.
David, I know at some point you had your instructors, they had to at least spend some time in the book. Is that similar now, or what's your comment there?
Absolutely, because I think the book really, when you look at it, is very much an encyclopedia. it's how you interpret it. I think that I mean there's a tremendous amount. I mean, I think obviously it's the first geometrical book that came out. I mean, Hogan spoke about it in his book. Obviously Modern Fundamentally spoke about certain angles, etc., etc. But I think the golf machine really was it's part of folklore now, but it really is part of our history. And I think we get all our young coaches to read it. I mean, some of them can adapt to it a little easier than others. I think you've got to be a little bit probably more left brain. It's not sort of a Harvey Penick type book, that's for sure. But I think it has so much valuable information in there. And as Martin was saying, I think that the fact that the terminology may be a little bit different these days, but so much of that, I mean, just Mac, for instance, who obviously moved away a little bit from the golf machine to his Morad project. I mean that was the basis of Mac's stuff, and I think that it's all part of our evolution as teachers and coaches. That when we look at all this stuff, I think it's really dangerous for us to poo-poo any philosophy. You might not have liked the golf machine I've always felt personally that none of the players that actually really were devotees of the golf machine were great drivers of the ball. I mean, because they created so much lag, they couldn't square the club face up. Nick Bryce was always one with an image. If you had a carpet out in front of you and trying to beat the dust out of it, that you've got to get that shaft back in front of you. And I think there's more of that now. But I mean, as I say, I think it's absolutely a tremendous contribution to instruction.
Jim McLean, I know you're from Seattle, so you have a little quick weigh in on this.
Well, I got to go over to see Homer Kelly and spend an afternoon with him. My dad was a good player and an engineer for Boeing, and Homer worked for Boeing Aircraft. So always interested in me. I played with Ben Doyle quite a bit and knew Ben. I took a lot of lessons from Ben Doyle. Definitely not an expert in the golf machine, but really good with some of the people mentioned here, organizing the ideas. A lot of great stuff. I had the original Green golf machine book still out there, a little simpler to read actually. But I think, showing things in the positions and the sections really resonated with me and really helped me a lot as a teacher.
Cool. Okay, Tony, this one's for you. Next up on the hit parade. So, a lot of backswings right now, top of the backswings. We'll go with, since we talked about plane before, let's take the plane part of this out. Okay, so we just go generic, middle of the line plane. A lot of people like to see this club on the laid off side of the hands at the top of the swing. A lot of people in the Hall of Fame had a little bit higher right arm, a little wider right arm, and the club on the across the line side just a little bit. You work with some tour players, you see not only what you have to deal with your own players, but you see some other players too. Do you see it going one way and not coming back? It looks like it's going toward the laid off at the top. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it depends on the player, but I think that if you look at like the stuff that Gigi's doing now and some of those guys, you see a lot of guys trying to get it across the line, the stuff they're doing. So, I mean, I think it depends on the player. I mean, I've got guys that kind of do it a little, Smiley Kaufman played a little across when he played good. Lucas is pretty much on his hands. So, I mean, again, I think a lot depends on the shape of shot they're trying to hit and what they already do. I mean, I don't try to coach any player or try to coach any person and make it go just one style. I mean, I'm trying to fit it to what it does, with each shot. But, you certainly see a lot of stuff. Bobby Wyatt, who I taught through high school and college, I kind of screwed him up. He was really good across the line, and I tried to make it go the other way. And I kind of effed him up, and he's probably why he's working for Goldman Sachs now. So, I mean, trying to make it perfect. So, I think you got to take it player by player. I don't know if that's a good answer.
Anybody got anything on this top of the backswing in between the arms? Rick G. Silva.
Well, I think what's perfect is, and Tone, that's a really phenomenal response. Perfect is a really relative response there, and MJ would be honestly the person to answer this, but it's kind of like a jackknifing trailer. I mean, good God. I mean, if this thing's going over here, what do they have to do? And if it's over here, what do they have to do? And managing the club center of mass and this thing just whapping back and forth, how do you minimize it? So when I look at that, that's kind of what I try to keep in mind, you know? So when you get people trying to get the thing way over here, I mean, holy shit, what do they have to do to get that thing going somewhere neutral? If that makes any sense at all. I mean, holy crap.
Absolutely. Kevin Weeks, next up on the dais here. So at some point in time, like I've told the story a bunch. I grew up at a public golf course. My dad played with about 40 different guys. They were between a 5 and a 25. I played hundreds of rounds of golf with every one of those guys. I never saw anybody yip a pitch shot. Then one day, somebody thought they should have their hands really forward. And they've got people that, you know, are multiple tour winners that get the pitching yips. You have spent a lot of time studying and teaching the short game. Where do you see it is right now? There's a lot of people throwing it as far as explaining it as a throw, but then there's still a lot of people not really doing that much of a throw. So where do you see it now, and where do you see it going with just a basic pitch shot off of a good lie?
I think the pitch shot is a combination of body turn, and there's some toss in it. And I see people that really get in trouble when they start trying to pull the hands through without using the body. I like to see it, and I think the best pitchers actually, as they came through, the club was pointing pretty much right at their belt buckle, right at their center as they came through. I thought Bernie Najar posted a really good picture last night, a really good video of Greg Norman. I thought it was gorgeous hitting that shot. And in my mind, that's what I see the best ones do. He definitely had his body turning, but there was also some wrist action, keeping the handle pointing at the belt buckle, allowing the club head to go. And that's what I see people get in trouble, is when they start pulling, and then they bounce one in, then they start trying to catch back up, and it becomes a train wreck pretty quickly.
Anybody got anything on this? There's a whole bunch of folks out there, Karen.
Yeah, well, what I've seen as I've gotten older is just the way the golf courses have been designed. I just remember growing up in Illinois flat, you know, we had a really nice grass, and you could have like a little shallow shot. You could use a sand wedge pretty much everywhere. Now where I play here, we have very elevated greens, and then the grass grows like towards you. And so I see all these people trying to chip like with 60-degree wedges, and they like hit into the grass or they hit into the hill. So I think a lot of the times people just don't know how to match the club with the type of lie that they're hitting. So I think I don't think we teach enough of the lie and then trying to match the club to that particular lie.
Absolutely. Bill Harmon, and then Martin.
I've had the pitching yips, and I believe that Kevin is 100% correct. And I got out of him by just pitching with one hand, with my right hand. And I never mishit one. It was very odd, and I certainly wasn't pulling. I don't know if I was throwing, but to hit it with one hand, I had to combine my body moving with the club almost at a similar speed, where when you get the yips, you're so fearful of contact that then you start playing the ball, you know, somewhere behind your right foot, and the handle is even further in front of the ball, and then you're trying to pull it even further from there. And so even today, I don't have the yips anymore, and I'm a pretty good pitcher of the ball. But if I had to get it up and in from 20 yards for my life, I'd do it one-handed because I never mishit it, and I bottom out at the same place every time. It's the weirdest thing. And so I'm a big believer that people that are bad pitchers of the ball, that left arm tenses up, they pull, then the left arm stops, and then something else goes crazy. And I have had more success with even amateurs learning to start by hitting a chip shot with just their right hand and then moving them back 5-10 yard increments because the club never gets kind of out of whack or something.
Martin Hall.
Yeah, so look, I think there is a technical component to getting the yips. There's an emotional component, and sometimes that's the bigger component. So I think that if you can, when people hit a shot that's not so good, if you can train them early on not to overreact to it, I mean, the profile of people who get the yips would be the typical investment banker who's 2 handicap, he's played at winged foot, and he suddenly duffs one right on the last hole of the club championship. And he takes it home with him and he thinks about it for weeks on end. And I think that just, pours gasoline on the fire. So I think when you hit one that you don't like, you need to temper down your response. That's part of it. The other thing I think with the yips, I got a lot out of Hank Haney's book on fixing the yips. And Rick Jansen, Dr. Rick Jansen helped me with this. I think if you look at the people who've got over the yips with putting, they've just done something radically different. Whatever it is, they've done something different. They cock the head differently. They close one eye. They might not even look at the ball, but they do something different. So Rick Jensen said to me, when you really get the yips, he thinks it's like a fuse that's burnt and you can't fix it. You can't fix the yips. You have to build a different sort of profile. So I've had a decent amount of success with that. I think people who've got the yips generally will feel it's never all that far away. But I think you can work through it. But I would encourage people to look at the emotional part as well as the technical part, not overreacting to the shots.
Mike, good answer, Martin. Mike Perpich.
Tie in real quick. Mark said about the emotional part. When I had first gone to River Pines, this guy contacted me and said, look, I can hit the ball. I can't hit a pitch shot. I can't get it off. So he comes, he's got a bag. He must have 12 wedges in there. He's got every bounce, whatever. So we go right down to the pitching area. And so I said, okay, go ahead and do a few. And I mean, he almost made me throw up. So I said, look, here's what I want you to do. I had my 56 and I put my left hand on my right shoulder and held on the club. And I said, I just want you to just try this. And I hit this pitch shot and it hit and went right in the hole. And he looked at me, picked up his bag, and he headed right toward the parking lot. And I go, where are you going, man? He said, it can't be that easy. And that was it. That's the last time I saw the guy. So
Tom has had one on this real quick, and I got a follow-up on for Jim. Go ahead, Tom. Tom Rezendes, Mike. Here we go.
I think one of the things I see is this ball back, and then as you mentioned to earlier, the strong grip. So you get the ball back, the handle ahead, the face really shut. Plus they suck it inside with their hands, and from there they're just toast and they start pulling on it. That's what I see a lot of them do.
So my follow-up here for Jim is Jim, and I'll listen to what all you guys say. So I think I could go individually, go teach one of y'all's golf schools tomorrow and be the little fourth assistant. Y'all would not hate what I was doing. So I know that when you worked on, blagging it, leaning it, right, it affected your drive. And did it affect your pitching? Because obviously as good a player as you were, and it hurt your drive. And did it do the same thing it did when Luke Donald, tried not to change his short game and worked on lagging it in his full swing and leaning it, and it affected his short game? Did it affect yours?
Well, I think when people change one part of their game, it affects the other part of the game. I've definitely seen that with players. Yeah, for me, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole on really trying to lag the club and doing a few things that I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was a pretty good natural player. I had a good teacher when I was younger, and he left. Anyway, I just did a few things when I was in my early 20s, and yeah, got too much lag. Not too many people do that. They get, that pull the handle too much and drag the club too far. But yeah, it had affected my driving a bit, and it was, a struggle to shoot, in the 60s, that's for sure. And definitely with your chipping, getting too much pull and drag, like a number of people said, Billy said with his chipping, that's the kind of way a lot of us tried to play, trying to get more of the hands forward and lag the club and keep the club behind the hands. And it was, it's good up to a point, but then you start that drag and flip. And then you start doing what Tom said, you start leaning back on a little bit, and pretty soon you've got the whole thing. And it's interesting that a lot of tour players get into this. I wouldn't say a lot, but a number of tour players actually get in where they can't chip the ball. I worked a lot with Hal Sutton, and he would almost chip around a bunker. He was such a great ball striker, but if he missed a green behind a bunker, he was dead. You never think of that as a really great ball striker like that, but it can happen.
Okay, so the next person in line is Kevin, but I've got two questions I wanted to ask particular people, and this one's for David, and we're running right on time. So Nick Clearwater, by the way, his wife just had a baby a couple days ago. He told me he'd be about this point, he'd have to check out. So we really appreciate Nick from Golf Tech. So here's the question, David. So what year was it when Nick Faldo came to see you? And how old was it?
1985.
So 1985, and Nick
at that stage, let me see. Let me just work back. He was probably 27, I would say, 27.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just say that Nick wasn't born when he was born, and he was 27 now. He had the exact same issues, same type of player, good enough to, squeak on a Ryder Cup team, but wanted to do more, obviously had talent to do more. It's a different sport now. Equipment's a little different. What potentially would you have done different, as good as you did with him with the, what you had, the golf game of 1985? Is there anything that you would do different with him now if he came to you today at 27?
I don't think we've got enough time in this show here, Brian, to probably discuss that. But it was a different,
it's a worthwhile try.
Yeah, it was a different era. Let's face it. And I think the first person that really did a revamp, and he maybe doesn't get quite the credit for it that I got, just through the fact that Nick was a star player in the UK, and that was really a lot of the PR came from. But I think, Hank Haney did a really great job with Mark O'Meara. And you think in terms of where he got a more rounded golf swing. And so, I knew Hank very well from my early days in Chicago as Jim Hardy. It was a big John Jacobs area for sure. But, thinking back with Nick, it was like, we said, okay, we're going to take 2 years. You can't take 2 years now. Which tour player is going to come to you and say, well, listen, I want a 2-year plan. I don't care how I play over the next 2 years. If I get out of the top 50, if I lose my card, but that was Nick at the time. And so he stuck to his guns. And, look, it's a power game now. It really is. Nick was never a power player. As big a guy as he was, we actually went through a phase where I said to him, this was sort of in the maybe early 90s. And I said, Nick, and this is when you started to hear just rumblings of the Tiger Woods. And I just felt that listen, years to come, this is going to be a power game. And we actually got him hitting it a lot longer, because when I was in Japan, I studied Jumbo Ozaki a lot, who was a real big hitter over there. He wasn't necessarily using legal equipment, but he was a real big hitter. But anyway, he used to practice, almost like T-ball. He actually, when he stood up on it, he lost his spine angle. And it was very different, because, I think back in those days with the equipment, a golf swing was pretty much based around an iron swing. Whereas today, a golf swing is pretty much based around a driver swing. and you figure out how to hit your irons. And you look through history. I mean, great players have been great iron players, which Nick obviously was. And and when he grew up on a very small practice area, and his teacher at the time didn't want him to lose any balls. That was all about rhythm, and that was one thing that he always had. And the only time, just a sidebar, the only time Nick actually hit it long was at Augusta, which he won 3 times. But he would actually work the ball, and he'd work those slopes, whether it be 10 or 2. And so his driving statistics those particular weeks were right up there. So it was pretty amazing. But his game was all about control. And I think today, I mean, look, you've got to have power. I mean, you just can't see a Corey Pavin type player being successful in today's game.
Cool. Great answer. Martin, you wanted to weigh in before I go to Kevin here and his question. Sure. Martin, Chuck.
Just to David's point there, because it brings back, I remember seeing Nick hitting driver at Augusta, flying it not over the fence, but darn near over the fence. And he was hitting his normal driver. This would have been in the 90s. And then he went and just hit a few really hard ones. And I remember being kind of shocked, like, wow, he's got way more in the tank that he did not use when he played on the golf course. So he had obviously a kind of a tempered swing to get in play, but he had tons in the tank if you really wanted to smash one.
Cool. Okay. Kevin Walker. This is a Post-it note, right? We've all seen them. You know how big it is. You got a ballpoint pen. You can write as much as you could read on this Post-it note and send it back in a time machine to you at 21 years old. What would be on it when it comes to this subject where you're here dealing with here? Golf instruction business, golf swing, your own game.
Well, that's a really good one there. Yeah, I would have to say to just try to keep learning and keep studying and watching as many good teachers teach as I could and read as many books. Basically, the thing that all of us in this call, I think, are still doing to this day, and constantly trying to learn, is just keep feeding the fire and keep trying to challenge yourself and get better at what you do. And I think that for me, I've learned a little bit or a lot from everybody that's on this call, and and the different pieces that I've learned are could be in the short game from Kevin, or how to break a swing down, or how to be prepared by Jim, how to be prepared to give a presentation, know what size light bulbs are in the lectern when you're going to go give a talk, and things like that. Are little things that you just don't ever forget. So I'd have to say, just keep feeding the fire as a coach, and ask a lot of questions. One of my best friends is a guy that's a good friend with probably everybody here, Mike McGettrick. And I was talking to Mike this afternoon, and I have never met a person in my life that asks more questions than McGettrick does. It's unbelievable. So in fact, he's never called me one time and told me anything. He's always calling me and asking me. Asked me about chipping this afternoon. So I'm like, guy's forgotten more than I'll ever know probably, but he's still asking questions.
Great answer, Kevin. Michael Jacobs had one here. One piece of paper.
Yeah.
Michael.
If I could send back to myself 20 years ago, I would say that if every 5 years I was teaching the same exact thing, I probably wasn't evolving. I would tell myself that. I would also tell myself to enjoy the ride, and more than we do sometimes. We work hard, we beat ourselves up in the sun, but and on the bottom, I would say at the end of the day, it beats having a real job. So.
Absolutely. Okay, Karen, real quick, and then Jeff, I'm gonna let you answer this, and then you have the next question. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, well, along the same lines, learn as much as possible, but I would have made a better journal, like detailed some of the funny things that happened, because we could all write a book or do a TV show or a movie about the things that have happened to us during lessons.
Cool. Okay, Jeff, you your answer to that question before I give you your question here.
All right. So if I had a little piece of paper and I had to write just a few things to myself, I would say, be a great communicator, be effective, train skills more, learn everything I can, and talk less.
Cool, but you're going to have to talk more in a second because you're the next question. Okay, so here we go. Back on golf swing mechanics. Okay, backswing pivots. So here's some options. You can have weight left and left lean. You can have weight right and left lean, Montgomery, right? You can go right early and be neutral, which like maybe like a McElroy, or you can get to the right and have right lean. What do you think about, I know you've spent, you know, a bunch of time with Mike Adams' program, and they're, you know, not one way is the highway, but what do you think about that besides giving me the, don't give me the, any of them are good. What do you think about where the general golf instruction body of current knowledge is when it comes to that shifting and leaning at the top, and where do you see it going, since everybody looks like they're going to try to do what Bryson's doing right now and take creatine and swing at it like a wild man? Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. I think that people right now, I think that the majority of people are moving off center to the right some and then back to center. But I think you're right in the fact that there's an awful lot of, I'm going to copy this guy, whoever this guy is, who's playing hot, and go look at, you know, what was Matt Wolf doing? Everybody ran to him. What was what's Bryson doing? And everybody runs to that thought. I think that is forever the golfer and forever the teacher that will accept what the golfer wants. There's a lot of teachers out there that will give a guy what he wants so he'll stay working with him and try to make that work when that might not be what's best for him. I think that there's too many teachers out there that are doing it, but I still think it's.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. So picture in your head, you've studied a lot of golf swings. Picture in your head a Tiger Woods in about 95 or 6, right? He's hitting his driver, hit it plenty long. I'm sure if you go back and give him one of these clubs and these balls, it would go a little bit longer.
Right.
He moved a bunch to the right.
Yeah.
He leaned a little more to the right than he does now. Do you see anybody doing that, or is it just so out of style that you're not going to see anybody, even though it worked damn good for him, it worked pretty good for David Toms? So it looks like the right shift and right lean is totally out of style. Do you think it's dead for good, or somebody's going to come along doing it and it's going to work out pretty good?
Oh, I think those of us who pay attention to history know that things aren't dead for good. Somebody's always going to try to bring it back, and they'll use, you know, what you just gave a great example. You know, Tiger did it in you know, back in the day. And so somebody's going to make that somewhat of their model and go with that. They're going to run a bunch of people through that. And I don't think it'll ever go away. I think that there's trends. And, you know, I think if we just pay attention to history a little bit, you see an awful lot of trends kind of come back. And they'll phrase it a little bit differently, but if you just kind of watch what's going on, there'll be some similarities.
Do you think, and what does anybody else think about that? Do you think the big move off the ball, somewhat forward bend, right, you know, or whatever you want to call right leaning torso? I mean, like, there is no teacher walking out on Instagram talking about that right now. Do you think Bill Harmon, do you think it's nobody's going to ever teach it again? Or
seems like I've been kind of directed towards looking at the older players, and so many of them lifted their left heel, took a huge hip turn, but they didn't move off the ball that much. It was interesting. Yeah. And they still, for whatever, you know, they moved off a little, but not excessive, let's say like Curtis did there when he was with, which he had a lot of success with. So I'm very intrigued by the older player that took the big hip turn, lifted the left heel, but they didn't have that right lean, as you said. And I think my dad did that. I've seen Mike Bennett sent me a picture after he worked with me. He said, you know, we use this guy's swing as one of our models, and it was my father's. So he said, you don't have an excuse. You should have known better. And so when I looked at Snead, you posted something on Facebook, Snead from behind, I think, a few months ago.
Yep.
Very interesting. Yep. Very interesting. Not as much right lean, I guess you'd call it.
Anybody else got anything on that? Rick Murphy and then Rick Silva and then Ed. Go ahead, real quick. We got to get to these last two.
Look at a place like a centered motion, but I'd like to hear what Michael says about the benefit of that body motion.
Go ahead, Rick Silva, real quick.
Definitive information. The more definitive information that we have about the joint centers, I think that we'll stop going back to yesteryear, maybe, but left foot coming off the ground. Well, what's actually happening at the joint center as opposed to, you know, a flat picture that's smashed, you know, with a fly swatter MJ.
Great, Rick. Mike, you have something on this, Mr. Jacobs?
Okay. Well, if you look at gait or if you look at the human anatomy, so the quadriceps muscles would contract and straighten the knee. When you have the effect that you're talking about in gait or the golf swing area that you're talking about here, when somebody lifts their foot off the ground and then puts it back down, they get some free energy through the leg to help extend the knee and drive the body up. So it's kind of, it's the same way in walking, how when you're walking, you can walk a long distance. You ever notice you go for a long walk with somebody and you walk for 10 minutes and it goes quick. You get home and you feel refreshed. Yet you go to a museum and you're walking around, or you walk around Disney World, you walk around, you're stopping, you're starting, and you know, you're exhausted at the end of the day. So it's that free energy, and you can get more from what's out of the ground through the leg by lifting the leg and doing that. It's a proven.
Cool. Ed?
Just historically, I was going to say that from the minute the first ball was played, the best player became the model, and everybody wanted to play like they did all the way through history. So you're not seeing a lot of players out on tour doing that movement now, but we're a young person to come up and maybe win one or two majors, and all of a sudden it could come back around.
Cool. Okay. Next up, Bernie. I know you're starting to do more. We've talked about it. It just so happens that this comes up. What do you think could be done? I mean, obviously there's been, I've always liked Martin's show. There's been some good golf instruction on TV. I used to like Mr. Venturi, who Rick knew real good, and obviously Jim knew super well. Did a great job with those tips. Johnny Miller just standing up in unbuttoning his suit. What do you think? What would you like to see? And how do you think golf instruction on TV could be better?
It's a great question. I think everybody's watching more video than ever, especially the younger generation. They're on Instagram. People's attention span is typically not for more than a minute. And, to do that on TV takes a great skill. What Martin does on his School of Golf show is incredible. I mean, to be able to talk at the speed that you do, answer the questions, go through the information, talk about the history of the game is truly incredible. David Leadbetter, watching your videos growing up, you were phenomenal at doing that. And everybody on this panel, Jim McLean, I learned so much. Actually, I went to one of your instructor seminars, thanks to Charlie Staples back in the day. You guys know your stuff. And we as professionals, if we can convey a message today to keep people interested in the game and get people practicing better and playing better, it's only good for the game, and it's good for us as well, because we're showing our command of the knowledge that's required to be successful. And that builds credibility not only to our students, but any audience that's listening to us. So my hat is off to all you guys that have been on Golf Channel all these years and kept people engaged, because it's hard to do, especially now when you have, call it a minute to get through to someone. So I think
Speaking of a minute, if anybody's got 30 seconds on something they'd like to see in golf instruction on TV, anything, not necessarily how to do it better, just something. Nobody. Okay. Rick Dandy, you spent a lot of time with Mac O'Grady. Do you think that Mac, back in the day, give me some years that you were with Mac, give me some historical.
It was after the 87 Open, so like 88, 89, 90.
Okay. Do you think, you spent a lot of time with him, do you think he ever thought he would be nearly idolized by a subset, if you want to use of golf instructors? I mean, there's no doubt that, and look, he's had a great influence of a lot of us here, but I'm just saying, you knew him, from just hanging out besides, working with him in forum and stuff. Do you think he thought?
Yeah, that's true. We ate a lot of oatmeal together. Okay. But the one thing he had in common with everybody here, he was technically competent. He had a passion. He never wanted to ever stop learning, ever. So do I think, we wanted to think that at the time, nobody knew. You were just in it. So, I mean, it's amazing. I'll tell you what, 30 something years ago, if I thought I could spend 15 minutes with Jim McLean or David Leadbetter, I would have walked to that meeting. So it's a very special night.
All the way from Bethesda. Okay. So we got through everything, but I have one more question, and it's for everybody. And this is just one name, so we should be able to get through it, and I can put a bow on this. I really appreciate all of you folks doing this tonight. I think it really came out great. A person younger than you, currently teaching golf, that you've learned something from, that you'd like to at least mention their name. Go first, Karen.
She has really
Please say
cornered
again.
Christina Ricci. She's cornered the market on really helping the average female golfer for less better. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Mike Perpich.
Younger than myself. Oh gosh. Come back to me.
Okay, Bill Harmon. Everybody's younger than you. Come on.
And that's the truth. I took a lesson last year, spent about 3 hours with Dana Dahlquist. And although I couldn't do everything he wanted me to do, I learned a lot about some stuff. And, I finally got out of that formula for ignorance, which is contempt prior to investigation.
Cool. Tommy Rezendes, you're pretty young, younger than you. Somebody you've learned from.
The guy that I think is a couple spots below me, Mike Jacobs, kinetics, body stuff. Pretty
cool. Rick Silva.
Outside of the obvious, Mike Jacobs, which I believe is like a month or so younger than me, but Andy Patnow in Arizona, phenomenal guy, Andy Patnow.
Cool. Jim McLean.
And I've learned a lot. I've got a lot of guys that work for me. I've learned something from Adam Koloff. It's been really good. He's been great on Instagram, and I've learned a couple really new drills from him.
Awesome. Rick Murphy.
I'd say Michael Jacobs, but staff that I've had in the past, Ryan Smith is a great teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Awesome. Martin Hall.
Mike Kohler, my right-hand man. He challenged me to be better, but I've learned quite a little bit from Michael Kohler.
Awesome. David?
I would say James Ridyard. James, to me, is a genius with wedge coaching, and all the research he's done into wedge play is pretty amazing. I've learned quite a bit, actually, just listening and working with him.
Great. Michael Jacobs.
Younger
than you. Do I come back to you?
I'll say Brian Manzella, because in spirit you're younger than me. You're younger than me in spirit, and maybe in some other things.
I get a bone thrown. Ed Ibarguen.
So look, there's too many to name, but I would ask all those young teachers that are phenomenal to take a little bit of time and go watch people teach. I think it's the best way to learn. Get up to see Michael Jacobs, go down and see Jim, go see David. They'll answer your questions. Go watch Martin Hall live. That's how you're really going to become a great teacher.
Awesome. Martin Chuck, younger than you, young man.
My assistant, Aaron Olson, is an excellent coach. He's really good. I've learned a lot with him.
Cool. Tony, younger than you.
Colby Touye, the fitness guy that I work with a bunch of my guys I've learned a lot from. And then Jackson Court, my assistant, who, he's my assistant only by title, but I've learned a lot working with him.
Awesome. Kevin, younger than you.
Well, all the good ones have been taken here. I hate to keep saying that I learned a lot from Jacobs, I learned a lot from Silva, and I learned a whole lot walking tour with Nick Clearwater. Learned a lot about how to talk to players walking with him and Andy and Mike.
Awesome. Kevin Walker.
George Gankus.
Great. Jeff Smith.
Joe Plecker.
Bernie.
Chris O'Connell, Jim Hardy's right-hand man. Chris is a wonderful teacher, has helped so many great players, and he is awesome to watch. So if you get a chance, check Chris out.
Rick Dandy. Nope, your mic's not open. Rick Dandy, go ahead.
Michael Jacobs.
Michael Jacobs. Yeah, a lot of Michael Jacobs tonight. It's Michael Jacobs love night. Okay, listen, I promised I wouldn't go over too much, but I wanted to get that last question out because we skewed this a little bit. Hey, I'm 58, so we skewed this a little old. I wanted to throw a little love to the young teachers out there. Folks, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I think it went great. To me, this is about as pumped as I've been for something that I've put on in a long time. And I really want to also say to the other coaches out there that aren't on this panel, I think this went good enough that the folks that I obviously know and love that I would love to have on here, because I think this is a good number, or a little bit less, maybe 16 might be even better. I'd love to have you on and do it again sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
hey,
you.
Stay safe out there. Wash your hands.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was an honor. It was an absolute honor to be with you.